So, speaking in tongues is a difficult gift for us to wrap our heads around in some contexts, because there's a lot of different understandings and views of how the Spirit might gift certain people in that way. I think where I would land on something like that, and our understanding of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, is that first of all, God, through His Spirit, gifts all believers. He has hardwired us to serve in His kingdom, as we've already talked about. And I would believe that today there's scriptural support for the fact that God gifted believers right after Jesus' time with speaking in tongues. And I think that's something He also gives to believers today. There are some in a camp that would say that that's something that came to a close once the biblical canon, once the scriptures were formed. But I don't see that as something that would apply to the context I've seen. I know God can work in incredible ways, and I have heard too many stories of how God has spoken in and through people's lives and what He's done on mission fields and how He's spoken through people regardless of cultural barriers. I think another view on the gift of tongues specifically that I think a lot of people in certain camp land on where I don't align would be that all believers everywhere receive this gift, or at least the most holy ones do. I personally have never spoken in tongues before, but I'm a fully devoted follower of Christ who has other gifts, and I think God's called me to use those gifts in a local church ministry setting. So I think there's a tension with this gifting because we're talking about the sovereignty of God and how He might show up and do divine things in our midst, and it's hard for us to fully understand. But where I land is that God absolutely still gifts believers, and speaking in tongues is one of those ways. For some that He chooses to give that gift. One of the biggest areas that we see, especially here in 1 Corinthians, as well as Acts chapter 2, is that speaking in tongues is a gift really for non-believers. Acts chapter 2 comes to mind because on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, there was people from all over the world that were present and hearing the gospel proclaimed in their native language, which is just goes to show that God is bigger than things that limit humanity. And He's capable of doing immeasurably more than we can ever imagine. So my understanding and my belief is that He can still gift however He chooses to. And we shouldn't limit His gifting, but should instead seek to live out the gifting that He's given us individually and collectively in the church.